Welcome to this webinar on keyboard accessibility, covering key considerations for developers. We're going to cover the following success criteria in this webinar. The first one, 2.1.1, relates to keyboard use and keyboard access to all functionality. This is followed up by not creating a keyboard trap, bypassing blocks, the ability for users to skip past repeated blocks of navigation, the focus order, which is the order in which keyboard users navigate through content on a page, and ensuring there is a visible focus outline. So firstly, keyboard access. The W3C provides the following description. All functionality of the content is operable through a keyboard interface without requiring specific timings for individual keystrokes, except where the underlying function requires input that depends on the path of the user's movement and not just the endpoints. However, this can really be summarized as all functionality available to mouse users is also available via the keyboard for keyboard users. Why is keyboard accessibility important then? Well, not all users can use the mouse. Users with Parkinson's will find holding the mouse difficult, especially with hand tremors. They will find holding the mouse difficult whilst trying to click on a link. Some users with profound physical disabilities may be using switch access instead of a mouse, and switches really will just emulate keyboard use at the end of the day. As we'll find out later on, it's possible to navigate entire web pages using just a couple of keys. And finally, blind users, so users who cannot see a mouse cursor, will not be able to use a keyboard, will not be able to use the mouse, so they will rely on the keyboard for all input. So the requirements for keyboard accessibility are that all functionality is available to mouse users that should be available to keyboard users as well. And some common failures that I normally expect to find are navigation menus, especially sensitive flyout navigation menus, drop-down menus, and media players. Media players are often problematic for keyboard users. Maybe you can't tab into them, or maybe you get stuck while tabbing around them. So how can you test keyboard accessibility? Well, you navigate using just the tab key and the enter key on a keyboard. That is the primary mechanism for interacting with a web page using the keyboard. The tab key will step forwards through all focusable content, that is controls such as links, input fields, buttons, and so on. And the enter key will activate the current control, link, button, or so on. For custom controls, you may need to use the arrow keys as well, but we're going to cover custom controls in a different webinar, so we will actually come back to that. And it's important to ensure that you can not only navigate to a control, but you can then interact with it. So a typical use case would be to step through a website. If I go to the Eon website here, I've got the BBC website as another example, but we'll start with the Eon Energy website. If I start tabbing into the page, if you look at the top of the page, you can see it as I press tab. Each tab press, I go through ways to save, help, my account, for business. I'm going through the links on the page. If I press enter on one of those, that will just open that link for me. And then once again, I can continue tabbing through this page. And again, we get to the top navigation. Now, what I can also do if I want to get to a link at the end of the page is actually I can hold down shift and go tab, and that will step me backwards through the page, and it will actually go all the way back around, cycle back down to the bottom, so you can tab backwards, and that is quicker in some cases to get to a link towards the end of the page. We'll look later on at some shortcuts that keyboard users can use, but by and large, the process of keyboard interaction with a web page is very linear. It goes from the top to the bottom, covering everything in between. So that's really how you test for keyboard accessibility. All that we're looking to do is make sure that we can tab to everything. If we can use a mouse to interact with it, can we then tab to it and use a keyboard to interact with it? If we can, that would be considered a pass. So how do you implement and ensure proper keyboard functionality as a developer? Well, the primary method is to use standard HTML components, using components such as a href for a link, input types for buttons, input types for fields as well, input fields. And really, by ensuring you're using standard HTML components, they all have keyboard accessibility built in as standard for free. If we get on to talking about custom controls, you might be looking at the topic of ARIA. ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and that really covers where you've got web apps and things which have richer controls such as tabbed interfaces, They might have drag and drop type functionality, and it is possible to make all of that keyboard accessible, but you do need to use special attributes which are outside the scope of this session. If you do require non-standard keys to be used, so you might require arrow keys to be used, you should instruct users in how to do that visually on the page, because they will often be expecting tab and enter to interact with components. If there are other controls needed, you should bring that to their attention. So moving on then, 2.1.2 is no keyboard trap, and really this can be summarized as if you can tab onto something, you should be able to tab away from that something. This can be a real problem where you have perhaps a media player or a scripted control that you can tab onto, but then the script doesn't work properly and the focus is trapped on a control. And that means that users are effectively unable to tab away from something. So why is this important? Well, if you have a keyboard user who finds it impossible or very difficult to use a mouse, if they can tab onto a control but then can't tab away from it, that means the page is effectively unusable. They can no longer get to any functionality on that page. Now, a few years back, this would have been more commonplace with perhaps the embedded YouTube player, but that's gone through a lot of changes and now works very well. But it is still with things like media players or heavily scripted custom controls that I would expect to find similar aspects or similar problems to this. I will note that I haven't found a keyboard trap on the Eon Energy website. We'll look in a moment. It's very easy to test. But how do you avoid creating a keyboard trap? Well, avoid using scripts that keep the focus in one place. A common scenario for this is where you have a form and you want to keep users in an input field until they enter the right value. But that is going to cause problems if users want to interact with the rest of the page. Perhaps they only wanted to have a look at this form, they didn't want to interact with it, and now they're stuck there. If you're moving the focus in response to a user request, such as pressing the submit button on a form, which then detects errors and moves the focus to one of the fields that's in error, that is perfectly acceptable, and that's a fairly common use case. So if you move the focus in response to a user interaction, that is acceptable because users will be expecting something to happen. So how can you test this? Well, very easily, if you just jump onto any page and then press and hold the tab key, you will find that the focus just goes round and round and round and round the whole page, and the page will scroll up and scroll down as you go through every single link on the page very quickly. And really, that is just telling me that the focus is not getting trapped anywhere. Because it's able to go round and round, the focus is not being stuck on any one control. So it's a very quick checkpoint to check. Just tab round, press and hold down tab, make sure the page scrolls up and down a few times and you've tabbed through everything, and then you can be sure that there is no keyboard trap on any of the controls that you've tabbed onto. Moving on to 2.4.1, bypass blocks. So as I've already explained, keyboard users are restricted navigating in a very linear fashion. They have to tab through all of the links on a page to get to the middle of a page. They will have to tab through all the links before it, or go backwards and tab through half the links at the bottom half of the page. So this checkpoint was described to address that problem, and it can be described as a mechanism is available to allow users to bypass blocks of content that are repeated on multiple web pages. Now, typically, that will be the navigation in the top of a page. That appears on every page, and if users only want to get to the content in the body of the page, they do not need to tab through that menu. So how can you do this? Well, there's a way to put in-page links in a page. That's a link that skips to another point within that same page, and you can use it to jump or skip past these these repeated blocks of navigation or these blocks of content. So this is just a very short snippet of HTML. I'm not going to dwell on this because actually there's a very good working example on the Eon Energy website which we'll look at now. So how can we test for the ability to bypass blocks and see if that's present on a page? Well, if I just go back to the Eon Energy website and jump up to the top, in fact what we'll do is go to the home page here. And now if I start tabbing onto the page, if you keep an eye on the top left of the page, the first link that appears on the page is hidden until you tab onto it, and then it receives the focus skip to content. And if I press tab now, if I tab backwards onto that and then press enter, the page scrolls down and my next tab press will take me to the get a quote button in the middle of the page. And what that's done, if I just scroll back up to show you, that has jumped me straight past this repeated block of navigation. Now, perhaps on this home page, it's only saving me 6 or 7 tab presses, but I have seen other pages with maybe 2 levels of navigation. There might be 30, 40 easily links in the navigation at the top of the page, which otherwise will all appear in the focus order and would need to be tabbed through before I could get to the body of a page. So just having that very simple link is extremely useful for keyboard users and makes the page a lot more usable for them. As I've already said, this works very well on the Eon Energy website. There's really no work to be done there, so it's great to see something like that in place. Okay, so we appear to have skipped backwards a few slides, but let's move on now to focus order. So once again, because keyboard users are restricted to going through order in a very linear, pages in a very linear fashion, it's important that they do so in an order which makes sense. And this can be described as if a web page can be navigated sequentially and the navigation sequences affect meaning or operation, the focusable components receive focus in an order that preserves meaning and operability. So what that means is if you provide a list of instructions for users, they are focused in an order that makes sense. That means that instructions will be focused on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rather than 1, 5, 4 and so on. It's important because users have to have pages that are predictable. Users have an expectation of what will happen when they press the tab key and what link will be selected. And it's important that they can predict where the tab key will go to next. So by ensuring a logical focus order, users will be more confident navigating the page. So let's have a look at how you can ensure a logical focus order. The best way is to avoid using the tab index attribute with any value greater than 1. This can create an artificial focus order, in which case the underlying source markup doesn't need to match the actual focus order, but it more often than not creates problems. The best way to achieve a logical focus order is to ensure that the underlying source HTML is ordered in the way that you wish users to navigate the page. So the order of controls in the markup reflects the order in which you would like users to tab through them on a page. That is by far the best and most appropriate way of ensuring a logical focus order. It's also a good point to make sure that hidden content does not receive the focus. This can create problems for sighted users if they tab and they realize that the focus has disappeared because it's on a hidden component. It can be very confusing. So how can you test for a logical focus order? Simply use the tab key to tab around the page. At any point, guess where the next tab press will take you. If you are correct, the focus order is likely logical. So let's just have a look at an example then. If I start tabbing onto the navigation of the Eon menu, then if I tab onto the Help button there, I'm reasonably confident from experience that pressing tab will go onto the My Account section within the main menu and then to For Business. That follows the common paradigm of proper focus order. That is, the focus will go from the top left of the page to the bottom right of the page, going through each section in a logical and predictive way. So it goes through the horizontal navigation regions left to right. It will go through vertical navigation blocks from top to bottom and so on. Now, because I'm able to successfully predict where the focus is going to go, I would suggest that that is a logical focus order. If I just want to demonstrate an illogical focus order, let us have a look at the Coca-Cola website, which does actually demonstrate this quite well. So I'm just going to let that load, and I'm going to create an artificial focus outline so you can easily see where I am as I tab around the page. So if I start tabbing around the Coca-Cola website, hopefully you can see I'm on the reducing sugar link and the main horizontal navigation there. If I start tabbing across that, it seems very predictable until I get to the About Us link. Now, you may want to pause the video and have a think, where is the focus going to go when I press tab next? I predict it's going to go to the packaging and sustainability. That is the next sequential horizontal navigation block. It would be logical for the focus to go there. So here I go, press tab, and it actually goes to the Coca-Cola logo above where I am. Okay, I'm going to press tab again, so you may want to pause and think where you think the focus is going to go. As I press tab, that actually goes to the search at the top right of the page. I press tab again, it goes to the Contact Us link. I press tab, and finally it goes to the packaging and sustainability links in the main navigation region. So that is what I would class as a illogical focus order. I cannot successfully predict where the focus is going to go after any one of those navigation blocks. And that means I'm going to be slightly apprehensive about accessing the rest of the site using my keyboard if I cannot predict where I'm going to go at any one time. So that is all about focus order. Let me just disable this high contrast focus outline. We'll come back to that in a moment though. So moving on then, past focus order, we look at focus visibility. It is essential that users can see where they are at any one time on the screen. And if we go back to the Eon website, if I tab backwards and forwards along the main navigation region, you can see where I am because there is a dotted outline and the font color changes. So it's a very visual way of telling me where I am within that region as a keyboard user. So I know where I am, I know where I can go to next. Again, if we go back to the Coca-Cola website, if I start tabbing through that page without my artificial focus outline, I don't know if you can hear, but I'm actually pressing the tab. There is no visual indicator whatsoever that I am tabbing through the page. So that does not have a focus indicator, unlike the Eon website. So why is it important to have a visible focus outline? Well, mouse users can follow the mouse cursor around. They are always aware what they are going to be pressing or clicking on. But it's important that keyboard users also have a visual indicator of their current location. Without a visible focus outline, a website is practically inaccessible to keyboard users. Even if you've taken the care to make things keyboard accessible programmatically, if you do not have the CSS backup of a visible focus outline, keyboard users will really not be able to use your website. So how can you test this? It's very easy, as we've just looked. You tab onto a page and you have a look and see if you can find where you are at any one time. If you tab onto a link, that should be indicated in some way visually. Often a dotted outline is the very minimum, and that's the default action of browsers will give you a dotted outline around the currently selected link. But often you can use CSS to actually enhance this and provide a different color. So you can implement this. If you do not do anything, you will already have passed this checkpoint because browsers will implement a default focus outline. If, however, you use a reset style sheet, that is a style sheet that tries to set web pages visually back to a common set of visual characteristics, they will remove the focus outline on the assumption that you will put it back in. However, many times designers or developers often can easily overlook that point, and it means you end up with a page without any focus outline whatsoever, and that means that the CSS outline attribute is set to none. So you should never use the CSS outline attribute unless you plan to implement an alternative, and for similar reasons you should avoid using a reset style sheet. Now, what you can use in addition to the default browser outline is the CSS focus pseudo class, which allows you to create your own custom focus outline. I've given some example CSS here. That just, in this case, assumes a link and a element receives the focus. It will provide a background color of yellow with a solid black 2-pixel outline around it. So that's a very visual cue that this is the current link. As soon as you tab away from it, something else will have the focus and this will return back to its default state. So that's just a quick overview of the importance and how to test for a visible focus outline. So that's just a quick roundup of some of the key issues relating to keyboard accessibility. I hope it's been useful, but if you do have any questions, please do contact your line manager who can then pass them on to us to get back to you with. Thank you.